Welcome to Disciple Dojo. This is not a clickbait title. This literally is the most beautiful commentary on a biblical book that I have ever seen. Not just ornately beautiful, although it is that, but also the content of it. This is absolutely an incredible commentary, and I wanted to share it with you. I made sure I read the whole thing and finished it all the way through, and I was really excited to do this video because this thing is amazing. It's on a book of the Bible that is relatively obscure to a lot of people. They may know a couple of verses from it, but the book as a whole is arguably the hardest book in the Old Testament, at least in the Hebrew Bible, to interpret. I would put it up there. I think it's the equivalent of what Revelation is in the New Testament. This book is in the Old Testament in terms of people just not knowing what it is or how to read it, or misreading it. And that book is the book of Ecclesiastes, or as it's known in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Qohelet. And we will probably do a series walking through the book of Qohelet at some point in the near future here on the channel. But for right now, I want to share with you this book that I just finished, Qohelet, Searching for a Life Worth Living. It's by Menachem Fish and Deborah Band. So I'm going to show you why this is so amazing, what I appreciated so much about it. Even though I don't agree with a few things in it, it is still absolutely incredible. So if you appreciate this and our other reviews here on the channel, or our other teaching videos here on the channel, or anything we do here at Disciple Dojo, we'd love for you to show that by subscribing. When you do, tap the little bell icon to enable notifications. That just tells YouTube we like this channel. We want you to bump it up in the algorithm. We want more people to see Disciple Dojo content. All right, let's look at why I am floored by this book. Now, those of you that are new to the channel, you may not realize my 2 undergraduate degrees are in art, in studio art, in painting and drawing. In fact, when Disciple Dojo was just getting started, I paid the bills through portraits, through drawing, through sketch cards for tops, or private portraits, or portraits of people in jiu-jitsu academies all over the world. Like that, I'm an artist. I've been an artist all my life, and that's literally what I am, a trained professional, in my case, painter, although lately I do more drawing than painting. So art has always been something that is just second nature to me. And then after undergrad, I did an associate's degree in studio art and then a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a concentration in drawing and painting from the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. After that, I went to seminary, and that's when I began to rigorously pursue biblical academic study. So the reason that I love this book so much is because it does both of those things. Menachem Fish does the commentary on the book, the introductions to each chapter, and then Deborah Band is an artist who does paintings of the actual text, not illustrations of the text, paintings of the text, both in Hebrew and in English, of the entire book of Qohelet, or Ecclesiastes. And then she provides a commentary on her paintings for each chapter. This is published by Baylor University. This is not a cheap book. I picked it up at SBL last year, and even with the SBL discount, this was still not cheap. But I want to show you what's in it. Some of you may not care at all about this. Some of you may think this is absolutely incredible. If you have any interest in the book of Ecclesiastes, of Qohelet, this is a resource I think you should have access to. So here's what it looks like, the back. You've got some blurbs, including one from Rabbi Shai Held. His book, Judaism is About Love, that came out last year, is a phenomenal book. And you have the cover, and astute readers of Qohelet or Ecclesiastes will recognize the golden bowl. But you may wonder, why is there a medieval, or I guess Renaissance era, Spanish Alhambra here? That's what this is. This is a Spanish, like in, I think, Granada area. This is an Alhambra, you know, like a Mediterranean or an Islamic civilization palace. Why is that on the front? Well, they're going to explain it. You open it up, beautiful pattern, all based after actual mosaics, tiles, architectural details from that same period in medieval up through Renaissance Jewish Muslim Spain. Ellen Davis wrote a foreword, and Moshe Halbertal wrote the preface. And you got folks like John Goldengay and Ellen Cherry, John Levinson, David Novak. So Christian and Jewish scholars weighing in on this. Then you have the table of contents, and this is how the book is laid out. There's some introductory material. There's an introduction by Menachem Fish, an introduction by Deborah Band that explain the book. They explain the format. Then on pages 27 through 82, you have the actual illuminations. That is the artistic depictions of the book of Qohelet. Then you have the commentary materials, chapter by chapter, all 12 chapters of the book, and then the afterword by Menachem Fish. So I'll show you what it looks like. Ellen Davis has her forward, and it talks about like what the cover image here. So this cover image, the golden bowl with the earthly kingdom, shall we say, symbolized by the medieval Alhambra. And then there's this pattern. It just looks like decoration, but it's not. I'm going to zoom in as close as I can get. This is micrography, tiny writing, all throughout, all around the border. And this is in Hebrew. And so in the introduction, it says, surrounding the bowl is a micrographic border composed of 44 poems composed by Shmuel HaNagid, 1056 AD, the famous Jewish Grand Vizier who ruled in Granada. So turn of the millennium Jewish poetry from Granada is what has been worked into this around the image of the golden bowl and the estate at the beginning. Now, the only reason I point that out is because throughout this book, all of the art is that intentional. And that's what Band's commentary on the illuminations does throughout. It explains all the symbolism, all the imagery that you see. Nothing is accidental and nothing is purely decorative. And that was what was so beautiful about reading this book. So then there's a preface. Moshe Halbertal talks about the struggle that Qohelet is going through and what does it mean that something is hevel havalim, vapor of vapors is how they translate it in here, not meaningless or vanity as traditional translations have it, because that's not what Hebel means. Hebel means literally vapor or smoke or mist. So the image is not on futility or meaninglessness in an existential sense, the authors argue, but rather transience, impermanence in the face of a world that seems so permanent and a God who is permanent. How do we make sense of that? So then the authors give their acknowledgments, and then we come to the introduction to Qohelet, Menachem Fish. He talks about how his father, Harold Fish, wrote a very famous essay, Qohelet, a Hebrew ironist, published back in 1988, and how he was invited to deliver a paper at a conference honoring his father's retirement at Bar-Ilan University later that year. He says, coming to terms with my father's ingenious reading of Qohelet left me love-struck by the book, not because I thought he had gotten it right, but because I believed that he had not. So he has this struggle with how his father read the book versus how he read the book the more he got into it. I love this line. He says, Qohelet's journey is as emotional as it is philosophical. He despairs and rejoices, fumes and jokes. The cruel candidness of his musing aloud, and that's an important concept, he is musing aloud, is as captivating as it is contagious. And so there's discussion about translation choices that they make throughout the book. They also bring in the place that the book has within Talmudic and later Judaism. How do Jews read Qohelet? Now, I'm not a Jew, I'm Christian, and I know how Christians read it. Is that the same as how Jews read it? Are there points of commonality? That's an ongoing discussion in Ecclesiastes Qohelet studies. But in the end, he says, I read Qohelet as a concerned and deeply troubled religious philosopher wrestling with the profound problem of how to live a worthy life in the eyes of God under such conditions, what he's just talked about. How can we ever boast to live up to the absolute standards by which God will judge us, lacking the very ability to recognize them as such? It is a problem that, I believe, Qohelet solved to his satisfaction with great, surprisingly modern, and highly relevant philosophical acuity. So that's where he's going to end up in his interpretation. I don't totally disagree with this. I think there's more. And obviously, as a Christian reading Qohelet, I'm going to have a different conclusion in a larger biblical theological context. But in terms of what the book is doing, I found myself largely agreeing with many of the choices that were made. Then you have the introduction by Deborah Band, and she talks about, as an artist, why she chose to illuminate the book of Qohelet, why present the text, make paintings of the text, why do that in the first place? And then why use an Alhambra, Spanish Sephardic imagery in a text that was, if it was by Solomon, then it would have been like 900 BC, give or take. Why put it in, 1000 AD or later? And so she talked about the central metaphor, human life as a palace. She says, as I seek to lend light and dimension to Qohelet's ideas in these illuminations, I extend the palace metaphor to human life and deeds. And what grander palace than an Alhambra? the wondrously beautiful medieval palace and gardens of the Muslim Nasrid rulers of Granada. Despite all its magnificence, all the almost audible ghosts of the glittering and powerful people who strode its expanses, even the Alhambra crumbles slowly into the red dust from which it arose. So drawing on that imagery of a crumbling, something that was once filled with splendor and grandeur and glory and now is crumbling to dust, is a perfect metaphor for what is being wrestled with by the author of Qohelet. But then she also puts in some other stuff, other imagery. She says, throughout the book, you'll find adaptations of the Hubble Space Telescope's famous image of the ultra-deep field of space, which combines astronomical observations in all energy frequencies from ultraviolet through near-infrared to reveal an image of the heavens from the early universe, a few 100 million years after the Big Bang, through the images compilation in 2014. We are truly far beneath the sun. So that phrase, under the sun, denotes where we dwell as humans and what we wrestle with. But the book also points beyond, above the sun, those who are not dwelling under the sun, pointing to the vastness of God and his splendor and his glory without outright coming and talking about it. And then in terms of who wrote Qohelet, traditionally Christians and Jews have traditionally said it was written by King Solomon, possibly at the end of his life, looking back and lamenting. Personally, I think that is possible. I don't rule that out, but I do think that there are good reasons to date Qohelet to a later time than Solomon. And I found myself largely in agreement with what Ban says. She said, Jewish tradition ascribes the book of Qohelet to King Solomon, 10th century BC, renowned for his wisdom and the luxurious wealth and power of his reign from Jerusalem. Yet while the book's author dons the cloak of the great king, he likely lived more than half a millennium later. I don't think this undermines any concept of biblical inspiration, authority, any of that stuff. I think Ecclesiastes, Qohelet, never claims to have been written by Solomon. I think Qohelet is presented and is presenting himself, if he's the author, as a Solomon figure. No doubt about that. But there are marks in the book of it coming a little bit later. Now, I don't take a hard stance on that. I've heard good arguments for it being at least having its origin under Solomon, maybe even from his own pen. I'm fine with that. I also think it could be later. I think there could be evidences of later, if not redaction, then possibly even composition in the book. I don't think anything one way or the other depends on it. But Qohelet, the figure, is a Solomon figure. That much I think is indisputable. And then she also compares what you find in Qohelet and some of the Psalms and Hebrew wisdom literature with, for instance, Egyptian wisdom literature, like Tahotep's advice to a young person. She compares this to what we read in Qohelet to showing the similarities at a surface level, at a literary level, at an artistic level, but the vast difference in terms of the actual meaning. So it's a great introduction by both of them. Both of the introductions are great. And now we come to the illuminations, and this is the main course of the book. Each chapter, you have the Hebrew text on the right page, the English text on the left-hand page. Now, I'm going to be a stickler. I kind of wish these were reversed. I kind of wish the Hebrew was on this side and the English was on this side, and you read them both out from the margins. That's actually how they're done later in the book. But most readers are reading in English, so they're going to come to this first. But all throughout, you have all of these little Easter eggs. Like, again, this is all micrography. This is writing of different either poems or biblical passages. Sometimes it's something from Shakespeare. Sometimes it's something from a medieval Jewish poem. And then you have all of these images, like this jar with these precious stones or baubles being poured out, this tree branch coming up through a mosaic, and there's writing on the mosaic. And then there's this like ephemeral cloud imagery here, these little wisps. And Deborah, her name Deborah, is the female form of the Hebrew word for honeybee. And so throughout, she puts a little honeybee. You can barely see it, but there's a little honeybee in each image as kind of like her signature. And also because of the sweetness of God's word being like honey. So all of them are different. This is the English of chapter 1, verses 4 through 11, rather. And this is the Hebrew, same chapter 1, verses 4 through 11. There's micrography again here in this wispy hevel, this vapor. The images here, this is not, again, I can't emphasize enough, this is not decorative. There's a purpose for all of it. But as you're reading first, you're just taking it in. This background, astronomy. There's a Hebrew seal, a bulla, with Paleo-Hebrew writing on it in the name of Yahweh. There's what looks like a glass of some type filled with wine, gold trim. So all of these details, again, words around the edge of different poems. I just want you to take in how gorgeous this is. And so as you're going through, you're just noticing some of the symbolism. Again, the micrography is just tiny. You'd have to really zoom in really close to see, but this is all words. Again, you have the golden bowl. To everything there is a season, a time, and every demand under the heaven. You have the seasons of the year depicted in the leaves, phases of the moon, the sun moving across the sky. You have a broken palace, a grand marble floor mosaic that's now broken and crumbling. You have a horse in its different stages of life, from a young playing filly to a pregnant mom to a riding horse, maybe a cavalry horse, to an old workhorse at the end of its life. The three strands of the micrography weaving together here. A worker diligently carving something in very elaborate, skilled work, and then just being told by a rich dude down here, being pointed like a manager. So all of these Easter eggs. This one is references the parable of the king having no clothes, or sorry, the emperor having no clothes. So this ruler covered with his, literally peacocking in front of people, and then these two little kids pointing at him in unbelief. There's so much cool stuff. Like, this is a sukkah, and the micrography is words that draw out an actual sukkah for the Feast of Tabernacles. This one having to do with images of money and a taser, images of law enforcement and society. So even a modern image being brought into it. And then in the Hebrew, the ancient version of that, the whip or the sword. And then the heavens being separated from humanity by this vapor, this hebel. You have these four specific animals, and they have a very specific meaning in Jewish tradition. So this is literally the entire text of Ecclesiastes, these two women compared, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, or Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly, that Proverbs compares the two. And again, that's all micrography. You have scales of justice, but Lady Justice is pulling down her blindfold and actually winking, evoking concepts of bribery and perverting the law. This one's powerful, especially in light of what's currently going on in the world. A couple huddled around their dead baby under rubble in the context of a siege and the destruction that the war brings. This is powerful, powerful. And all of these are specific images. Like, this isn't just a random picture of a fountain. This is an actual water clock that was destroyed when the Alhambra was taken over. And then instead of being rebuilt after being controlled by the Catholics, it was just destroyed because they couldn't duplicate the technology that had built it. And then it ends with a depiction of life. And as you go further into it, you come further and further out of the light into the shadowy unknown and into the darkness. At the very end, you see the elderly people in the back, whereas up front, you see the younger people. And there's an elderly person giving fruit, in this case, grapes, to the young person. So the idea of being guided through life by wisdom until the end, when the lights dim, as Qohelet talks about at the end of his poem. And then at last, you come to the final image of the golden bowl, and now it's cracked. The Alhambra is no longer in its glorious state. It's actually crumbling and decaying. And then this micrography around the edges is patterned after a specific floor in a mosaic in a certain palace in, I think, Granada or one of the places that then got taken over and no longer exists. And then the end of the book. So now comes to the commentary. And each chapter, Menachem Fish starts explains the chapter, gives an overview of why they made certain translation choices, what he thinks the chapter is about. In this case, it's just a couple of pages. There's footnotes. They quote from a lot of scholarly sources, a lot of archaeological sources, historical sources. This is not devotional, light, just kind of pretty for the sake of pretty. This is real commentary, and it's very good. And then you come to the commentary on the actual illuminations themselves by Deborah Band. So there'll be a picture, in this case, the opening picture, and then she will explain why did she paint this the way she did. Now, sometimes this is small, so you just can flip back, and this is what I did. I had one finger here at the picture, and then I would flip here and read what she has to say instead of looking back up here. And then on the actual text of each one, she has, this is why I said it would have been nice if she had flipped them. The English text on this side, but the Hebrew text is right here. So this, Baylor, flip this around if you reprint this. Put the Hebrew text above the Hebrew text and the English above the English, it'll just make more sense. Anyway, small critique, but this is a glowing review because of how much I love this resource. That is my one critique of it. Switch the text. Anyway, then she goes and explains in both the Hebrew and in the English paintings why she did what she did. And so, for instance, in this one that had all of this jar with pouring out all these precious stones, she says, the rabbis compared the Torah to a cask which was full of precious stones and pearls, but with which had a tight-fitting cover and was put away in a corner so that no one knew what was in it until someone came and emptied it. And then everyone knew what was in it. So the heart of Solomon was full of wisdom, but no one knew what was in it. But when the Holy Spirit rested on him and he composed 3 books, which would be Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and Qohelet, all knew his wisdom. And I applied my heart to seek and explore by wisdom. Chapter 1, verse 13. So that explains the imagery of the cask full of these precious stones being spilled out. It's rooted in actual Jewish tradition. And there were so many things like this. I'm not going to, this review would be an hour long, at least, if I went through and explained them all. But that's what you get. You get, for every chapter, the 2 images, the text, so you can actually, because sometimes her writing is a little hard to read because it's artistic. So the printed text, both Hebrew and English, and then the explanation of why did she paint that section the way she did. Then you come to the next chapter, introduction to chapter 2. Fish gives his overview of what's going on in chapter 2, and then Band gives the images and her commentary on the images. And I'm telling you, the commentary on the images had just as much historical meat and contextual theological depth to it as Fish's commentary. So it's not like, oh, these are the pretty pictures. Here's why I put a flower here. It's not that. I learned so much from this. This was a feast in every sense of the word. Visually, academically, scholarly, philosophically, it was just so good. And so it does that for all 12 chapters. And so then the final chapter, there's a fig you might have noticed in on the last page. I'll flip back to it so you can see this. Here's one more example of interesting detail. So there's figs all around the edge, and there's an actual fig there with some micrography around it. So what's going on there? She says, throughout Jewish lore, figs embody many qualities of Israel, humankind, and the world. In the Song of Songs, young figs budding from their branches symbolize spring rebirth, while the author of the medieval Midrash, Yalkut Shimoni, compares the fig to the divine law that Qohelet advises us to heed. And so this is quoting Shimoni. Why is the Torah likened to a fig tree? Because all other fruits contain useless, that is, inedible matter. Dates have pits, grapes have seeds, pomegranates have rinds, but the fig, all of it is edible. So the words of Torah have no worthless matters in them. Then at the end, there's an afterword by Fish explaining his overall approach to Qohelet. And then that's it. You've got the bibliography. You got an index to some of the concepts that were discussed, and then the author's bios. So that is Qohelet, Searching for a Life Worth Living. I've already said enough about this book. It is fantastic. I've been studying and teaching on Qohelet for a couple of years now. It's rapidly becoming one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Hebrew Bible books. So this was an absolute joy to read. Now, again, this is coming from a Jewish perspective, not a Christian perspective. And a lot of my viewers are Christians, not all, but a lot. And so if this interests you, I don't want you to just have this. If you're looking for, now, how does a Christian read Qohelet? In light of this stuff as well, I want to share one resource that I think would pair really well with this, that's a popular level resource. And that is Christopher Wright's book, Hearing the Message of Ecclesiastes, Questioning Faith in a Baffling World. This is a short book. It's by InterVarsity Press. It's only 5 chapters. There are discussion questions at the end of each chapter. This is for anybody. This is a popular level book. You do not have to be a scholar. This is not written for scholars, but the more understanding of Qohelet you have, the more you'll get from this. This, you can have no understanding at all, and you can gain from it. And also, Christopher Wright is a Christian Hebrew Bible scholar. So these together, if you're looking to better understand the book of Ecclesiastes or Qohelet, these would be my number 1 and number 2 resources from a Jewish and a Christian perspective, respectfully. This is where I would start. So that'll do for now. If you found this review helpful, interesting, in any way, if this you think is worth it, then we would love for you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And check out some of our other stuff here in Disciple Dojo. Maybe this is the first video of ours you're seeing. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of hours at this point of material archived here in our playlists. Everything is in the playlists. Don't rely on the YouTube algorithm to point you to the next video. Go to the playlists here on the channel and see how we have categorized everything, and dive in and start training. That's what we do. That's why we do it. Thanks for watching. See you next time back here in Disciple Dojo. And as always, in the meantime, keep training.